योगेन चित्तस्य पदेन वाचां मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोत्तं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि आबाहुपुरुषाकारं शङ्खचक्रासिधारिणं सहस्रशिरसं श्वेतं प्रणमामि पतञ्जलिं। गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। हरि ओम। So we have been looking at Samapatti, specifically the Nirvitarka Samapatti. We were looking at Vyasa's Bhashya on that sutra about Nirvitarka Samapatti. And we were we have not yet finished it. So today let's finish that and then move on to the next sutra. So as you probably remember, Nirvitarka Samapatti is where the support of the chitta is a gross object. It is a sthula vishayaha. It is not one of the subtle elements. And what happens is that it's param pratyaksham. So the individual directly shines in the chitta, in Nirvitarka. And the reference through word, language, memory, knowledge, everything is removed. So it's called arthamatra nirbhasa. So the object alone shines in the chitta as the support. And that is what Nirvitarka is. And last time we saw that Vyasa introduced and established the concept of avayavi. Now the reason to do that is that there are opposing schools of philosophy whose objections had to be countered. Secondly, the Yoga Darshana also accepts that the gross objects are made up of subtle parts. So it's a collection of subtle parts. Now the Nirvitarka Samapatti has been described, both the Savitarka and Nirvitarka have been described as Eka Buddhi. So one question that might arise is, if the object has a gross object, a sthula vishaya, is a collection of a multitude of small elements, how can it be Eka Buddhi? Because the Buddhi, the support is made up of many, many things. So how can it be one? So that aspect also has to be answered by Vyasa. So he establishes by saying the avayavi is one, even though there are many subtle particles that constitute it. And then what is the nature of the avayava that we saw last time already. So to continue, Vyasa goes further to sort of shoot down the objections that might come to this notion of, some other school might say there is nothing called avayavi and so on. So let's directly go there. So Vyasa says, Yasya Punaha. So again, if there is any school which says, Avastukaha sa prachaya visheshaha. So this collection, the prachaya is like a collection. If this whole made up of the collection of individual elements or individual particles, if it is avastukaha, means there is no real reality. The particles are real, the fact that it is a collection is real, but the whole having its own identity is not real. Right? So yes, there is a collection of atoms, but is there something called a cow? Right? So it says no, there is nothing called a cow, it is just a collection of atoms. So if somebody has this kind of a point of view, which is avastukaha sa prachaya visheshaha and sukshmam cha karanam anupalabhyam. So the karana, what builds that collection of atoms is the individual atoms. Now it is so subtle that it cannot be reached by the senses, right? Because it is so small and minuscule and so on. So if there are schools that say this, that the collection has no identity and the individual particles also cannot be grasped, cannot be reached, cannot be known, then tasya, says Vyasa, avayavi abhavat. by this notion that there is no identity of the whole, by this notion that there is no avayavi, so that is avayavi abhavat, atadrupa pratishtam mithya jnanam iti. So if somebody says, okay, so there is no real avayavi anywhere, it is simply a collection of particles, then everything is atadrupa pratishtam. Right? So we have already seen viparyayo mithya jnanam atadrupa pratishtam. So everything, all these things that are being talked about are not real. There is no reality behind it. Okay, if that is the opposition that is coming in, then Vyasa says, then prayena sarvameva praptam mithya jnanam iti. If that is true, then everything that we see, everything that the senses act upon, then everything is mithya jnanam. Then there is no reality. Everything is false under that school. In that case, tadacha samyak jnanam api kim syat. So it says this samyak jnanam, this samapatti, this samadhi, all of this, then where would that exist anymore? If we start with a presumption that there is no avayavi, the particles are unreachable, everything is false, then where is the question of samyak jnanam? There is nothing there whose jnanam is to be attained. And that is how Vyasa is answering that. And if there is no real knowable, then what is the point? There is no samyak jnanam. Samyak jnanam api kim syat vishaya bhavat, because there is no vishaya left. Because if somebody takes a stula vishaya, the opposing school will object that it has no reality. It is avastuka because it is made up of particles. If somebody takes up a sukshma vishaya, it says, oh, that cannot be reached anyway and therefore that cannot be known. If somebody has such a notion, then there is no vishaya. There is no object to be known. And if there is no vishaya, then where is the samyak jnanam? So everything falls apart. So that is how Vyasa counters by taking this to a fallacy, and therefore Vyasa establishes that there has to be a avayavi, which is the subject of savitarka and nirvitarka samapatti. So further he says, elaborates, yadyad upalabhyate tattad avayavitvena aghratam. So yadyad upalabhyate, whatever it is that can be taken in by the senses, by a person, right? Tattad, all of that, avayavitvena aghratam, all of that is understood in terms of a avayavi. Okay, so whether it is this objects like this mat and this phone and the hall and so on, anything, the plant, the flower, the rose, the animal, everything is understood by a notion of avayavi which exists, and that is how it is taken in by the senses. That is sort of Vyasa reasserting that. Tasmat asti avayavi, therefore there is avayavi, yo, which means yaha who, mahatvadi vyavahara pannaha samapattehe nirvitarka vishayo bhavati. Therefore there is an avayavi which is big and small and everything. Right? The whole notion of big, small has to pertain to some real object which is the avayavi. So there is an avayavi which becomes the object of the nirvitarka samapatti and which shines as the object alone. And therefore Vyasa has sort of countered all the possible objections, has explained what is nirvitarka, savitarka, samapatti in terms of how our internal organs operate, and also established the validity of that by talking about the external objects which are the support. Right? So that is how the both sides have been established, and the savitarka and nirvitarka is now complete with this explanation of 1.43.
The question is, what is the relevance? What's the relevance of all that we just now spoke about and you heard about? It is like this. In the earlier sutra, Patanjali introduced us to three categories, three aspects, such as Shabda, Artha, Jnana. Now when I speak and when you hear, you can't be doubting, you will not have apprehension or you will not have a position that I am not speaking. You can't say Prashant is not speaking because I am speaking and you are hearing. So you will accept the Shabda aspect, the sound aspect, the verbal aspects. You will not doubt about my speaking because I am speaking and you are hearing. So Shabda will not be doubted. Artha will be doubted perhaps. Whether what I speak is meaningless or whether what I speak is verbal delusion, whether I am speaking about something non-existent. I can be speaking about non-existent object. I can give you a long story which is totally based on Vikalpa. Like there was John, son of a barren woman. And then I go on telling a story about John. That means that someone like John has never taken birth, because son of barren woman cannot exist anywhere. But then I give you a long story of John, you hear it. And then you say this is all meaningless because there is no such John. And then I have given a long story about John. So about the object, the concept of object, the entity of object is being taken objection to by some of the philosophers, particularly they are called idealistic philosophers. Now, you are not aware of these two kinds of philosophies, basically, which are called realistic philosophies and idealistic philosophies. But for a student of philosophy, this is a vital aspect, whether the philosophy is realistic or idealistic. So the idealistic philosophers hold that there is nothing like object. They don't exist. It is your idea, it is your imagination. It is because you have a psyche, consciousness, mind stuff, you get some reflection into it, and then you say this is rose and this is pot and this is cloth and this is man and this is pole and this is stone and this is gold. It is, if you don't perceive at all, you will never have fight between whether this is a stone or this is gold. You will have no fight. If you don't see, if you are blind and you don't have a psyche to have reflection of objects, you can't have position that something is stone and something is gold. So it is because of we have a psyche, we have a mind, we have senses, they catch some reflections, and therefore we say this is gold and this is stone. And many times the reality outside us doesn't correspond to our perceptions, and yet we believe in it, and which we consider during illusion, viparyaya. So there is a rope falling in front of me, but I go on shouting, crying, oh, snake, 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 snake. You will all get sticks and we start beating the rope there. The perception that it is snake can cause such things that we will end up beating, which is not a snake at all. We have beaten a rope. We have beaten a rope. So perception that it is snake created all those things. My perception, then my shouting, your response, you coming with sticks, you end up beating that object. Ultimately you realize that it was not snake, it was a rope, and there was no point in beating a rope. And we have done that. So even when the object is not there as snake, it is perceived as snake. Object is lying as rope, we don't perceive it as a rope and we perceive it as a snake, and do so all those things thereafter. So they say actually it is in your mind. That's called, in philosophy, it's called panpsychism. There is a philosophy which is called panpsychism. And we call it Drushti Srushtivada. The rose is there because I see the rose. If I had not seen the rose, it would not have occurred to me that there is a rose. So that means I see the rose and then I say this is rose. So my perception in one way comes first. For me to declare that this is rose, this is lotus, this is mat, that is brick, this is stone, that is gold, the perception comes first, and perception is the major entity. And therefore, these idealistic philosophers have a position that it is all in mind. The rose is in your mind, therefore you have a rose outside you. That is the position of the idealistic philosophers. And therefore they become so kind of dogmatic about their ideas. They end up saying there is really nothing like object. It is all in your mind. So Shabda, Artha, Jnana are not three entities. They do not accept the entity of Artha. They say it is your Jnana. It is your knowledge. Rose is your knowledge. And therefore this point of view had to be brought in. Because this is an investigation. Like investigative process, there's so many things, they bring things they will have to consider, they will argue on so many things. Ultimately it is proved that that is not there. But 2-3 hours or 10 hours or 10 days are spent on argumentation. Ultimately somebody is acquitted, is that right? Ultimately somebody is accused and then later acquitted. But the case went for 10 years. So such things happen in philosophy. Therefore, the Artha concept had to be investigated. Now suppose I give you edible thing, a dish of delicacies for you to eat. What do you do with it? You see, you smell, you taste, you eat it. Now same dish, it is given to a food inspector. Food inspector, he doesn't eat it. He doesn't taste it. He straight away goes for chemical analysis of it. Is that right? Investigating agency, we will not be tasting the food, smelling the food and tasting the food, eating the food. They will straight away send it to laboratory, chemical laboratories, and get necessary investigations done, and then have their kind of ruling or whatever. So this Artha aspect had to be taken to investigating lab. Because in the perception I am seeing rose, nobody refuses my existence. You don't have any objection on I am seeing the rose. So you won't object I am, you might object seeing, and you might object rose. You can't object I am, the subjective entity. Is that right? So the knowledge, knower, knowing, known. The knower will not be objected. The knowing may be objected as to how I am seeing it, my faulty way of seeing, some limitations in the way of seeing, some prejudices in the process of seeing. So you will object my process of seeing. You will object, take an objection for the object itself. Because it might be a fact that it is not rose, it is not a rose flower, it is a plastic rose-like flower, artificial. But I believe that I say that's a rose. You say no, it's not, it is artificial rose. Or you say it is painting. Sometimes the painting is so realistic, I don't see that it is a painting, I say that's a rose. And you say no, that's just a painting. So you can take objection to my seeing, you can take objection to object I declare, but you can't take objection on myself. Because you exist, I exist. So knower is not objected, knowing can be objected, and knowable can be objected. So knowable is what? Object. So object had to be investigated by philosophical investigating team. Like the food inspector doesn't taste the food, doesn't take bite of it, perhaps even he will not smell it, perhaps will not even touch it, straight away send you to lab. So that's how the Artha has been sent to lab. Because you cannot send me to lab whether I really exist or I don't exist. So it's a philosophical inquiry. That's why Vyasa had to delineate on it. Perhaps you might say, what is the need? We are dealing with samadhi, samapatti. What is the point in the speaking on some metaphysical aspect and concept of avayavi? So all objects. Now I say this is a microphone. I do not try to investigate the raw material of this, the raw material of this as a consumer. Is that right? As a consumer, I don't bother about any raw material of this matter, raw material of this matter, the plastic, etc., rubber, etc. I don't bother about it. My concern is this is a mic and I can use it. I'm using it. But suppose I am a acoustic engineer. I will start investigating the mic, the electronics behind it or whatever it is, the mechanism of it. Is that right? When I'm using, I don't bother about the technology out of which it has come. But if I am a technologist, I will have that perspective as to how is it that my voice is caught by this and that it is amplified somewhere. So similarly, Patanjali, Vyasa is delineating all on this, that avayavi concepts. This is the whole. Microphone is a whole, but there are so many parts in it. Is that right? Somewhere plastic, somewhere rubber, somewhere metal. So many things are there. So it is made up of so many parts. I don't look at the parts. I have no idea about the parts. I know only the whole, and I say this is microphone, and this is the use of it. This is the purpose of it. I will not be taking bite of it like we take it of a cone ice cream. There can be some edible thing on this shape, but if you give it to the baby, a baby will, what will it do? It will put it to your mouth, taste it. Is that right? Because it doesn't know that this is an apparatus, a microphone. So it will put its mouth. The child will put anything to its mouth. I won't put it, you won't put it. So the object as such, what is the object, this object for a baby? What is this object for innocent person? What is the object for animals, subhumans? What is the object for man? What is the object for one who is using it as a microphone? So Artha, he says, whether object is true. Okay, you might, idealist might say, it is not, take a stand, it's not true. Because it was not there yesterday, it will not be tomorrow. It's only for a while. But therefore, they will have a stand, it doesn't exist. But the part of it exists. You cannot totally destroy rose flower. It will remain in some form or the other. Is that right? You can't totally destroy any object. Therefore, ecology has a view that nothing can be destroyed in this world. You can only transform. Something will become something else. You cannot annihilate. That means something remains. Something remains, so they are convinced something remains all the time. Something was there before the rose manifested. It was in bud form, then it was in plant form, then it was in seed form. So in some way the rose has existed, and rose is going to exist in some form or the other. Therefore this concept of part and whole. So the parts of rose cannot be destroyed, the whole rose can be destroyed. That means the destruction of the whole rose is not complete, it is partial, because the part of it will not be destroyed at all. So avayavi concept is so important. On some day you will say the mat is destroyed. Suppose there is a fire and the mat is burnt and you say my mat is destroyed. There are some remnants. Some aspect of the mat has remained. Something is vaporized, something is evaporated, something has melted, something has become ash. So something has remained in some way or the other. So the parts cannot be refuted. You might refuse the whole, but you cannot not accept or reject the parts. So this avayavi concept of metaphysics has been introduced here. In case if you doubt very object, that samadhi has an object, and if you refuse the samadhi itself, then what is the validity of samadhi? What is the purpose of samadhi? If you reject the substrate of samadhi, samadhi gives you realization of what? Some object. But the object do not exist. What is the point of having samadhi then? And therefore this argument came in the what you call as forensic aspects. Forensic aspects comes here because somebody objects it. So because of forensic aspects coming up, he had to discuss with some metaphysics, part and the whole, avayava and avayavi. Avayavi is, this is the avayavi, the whole. Then it is made up of several parts. Some parts are indestructible. Is that right? Mic will be destroyed at some point in time, but the constituents of it, the parts of it, some parts are not destructible at all. So the metaphysics goes on going backwards. Raw material of this, raw material of the raw material, raw material of the raw material. So it goes backward, but something is eternally there. Something is existing. Something is ever existing. And that's why this avayavi argument has been brought in. Only point is with that, why this object has come in, which has only kept your brain spinning, or the brain not receiving at all perhaps. It has to be discussed, forensic aspect. So forensic investigation is a kind of investigation. Ultimately it is disproved, something is disproved, allegations are disproved, but 10 years the case went on. That had to go for 10 years to ultimately acquit something and someone, disprove something and something. So this is an aspect of philosophical process, that if any investigation is required, it must be done. And even if you don't understand, don't have any despise or aversion for it. You all have had so many agreements done for so many purposes. I am pretty sure none of you ever understood any agreement totally. It was in forensic language. You can't argue. Why don't you? We are making an agreement. Why don't you make it comprehensible for us? Why are you using the forensic language? It has to be like that. So you sign an agreement which really don't understand totally and completely, yet you sign it. You can't say, I will only sign if I understand it. You can't say, I will sign it only if I understand it totally. So many things, because for forensic purpose they have to word it like that, the agreements. That's called forensic language. It has to be like that. Argument must be in that, agreement must be in such language which neither of the parties understand. But in case it goes to court, the court will understand. That's how it has to be. So also in philosophy there are certain matters. So when you become lawyers, you understand the agreement. So when you become philosopher, you will understand these arguments very well. Okay, that's why it is there. It has to be there. Okay.
Okay. So the sutra that we have been seeing on Nirvitarka Samapatti started with Smruti Parishuddhau. And that Smruti Parishuddhi came from the previous sutra that talked about the Shabda Sanketaha, Jnanam, Smruti and so on. Now let's look at what Guruji has to say about this, because he takes this So Guruji has this way of taking the most abstruse of philosophical arguments and so on, and relating it to our regular day-to-day practice, whatever the level of the practitioner. Okay, and you'll see that he constantly does that, whatever the topic. Right? So here, as an example, in the sutra, he picks up the Smriti Parishuddhi, and he elaborates on that as it applies to a regular practitioner. Right? And you can also see his own experience sort of shining through in the way he describes it. So he says, memory is the recollection. So I'm reading what he has written. So memory is the recollection of past thoughts and experiences. It is the storehouse of past impressions. Its knowledge is reflected knowledge. The sadhaka should be aware that memory has tremendous impact on intelligence. Right? And that is why the Smriti Parishuddhi is important. So now he is looking at, so even in his classes, in his teachings, he used to emphasize on the memory aspect, the importance of remembering, but also the importance of forgetting. Okay, so he used to bring up both of these suddenly, sort of out of the blue, and bring up, why did you do this? What was there in the last class? Why does it have to apply here? And so on. So constantly making us inquire on how we are applying and why we are applying and so on. So the main reason, as he says, is memory has a tremendous impact on intelligence. By perseverance in yoga practices and persistent self-discipline, new experiences surface. Now this is how the process is being described. Now these new experiences, free from the memories of the past, are fresh, direct and subjective. They expunge what is remembered. So the minutest observations in whatever asanas he used to be taking, so he used to remind again and again to pay attention to what is happening right now without getting too colored by the fact that that asana has been performed several times in the past, right? And therefore there is this whole memory thing that overshadows the current experience, which he used to remind that that's not to be done, where there should be a keen eye on what is being learned afresh now, which might even be contrary to what is being remembered. So then memories, they expunge what is remembered, then memory ceases to function as a separate entity. It either merges with consciousness or takes a back seat, giving predominance to new experiences and bringing clarity and intelligence. So it is important to sometimes take the memory part aside, look at the fresh new experiences, and later at a certain refined stage to see the influence on memory of the memory on the new experiences, and how the new experiences are going into the memory, and that sort of comes next. So he says, for the average person, memory is a past mind. For the enlightened man, memory is a present mind. Okay? So the present mind is made up of fresh experiences as well as memory, which needs to be clearly separated so that the intelligence and the memory, the two can be seen. Even for the unripe mind, there is a right and a wrong use of memory. It is not for recollecting pleasure, but for establishing a fund of experience as a basis for further correct action and perception. So you'll have so many stories of Guruji where he sort of accurately has knowledge of sort of position of each organ, each part and so on in any asana. And he could relate that in very surprising situations when you are not even on the mat, not even doing an asana, you are on a drive somewhere. He'll suddenly relate something that is being seen to the position of some part or some experience in some asana. And that is what you are seeing here. He says, establishing a fund of experience as a basis for further correct action and perception. Now look at the process that he describes. He says, in asana, for example, we start with trial and error. Okay, so the trial and error aspect, the exploration aspect, is sort of directly acknowledged and even emphasized. So we start with trial and error. The fruits of these experiments are graded by the discriminating intelligence and stored in memory. So the experiences are not to be necessarily directly going into memory. So there is the discriminating intelligence that is looking and reading and refining the experiences, and the upshot of that, the fruit of that, is going into memory. Now as we progress, trial and error decreases and correct perception increases. So memory provides foresight against error. Okay, so the role of the memory is to provide foresight against error, because now you know what happened last time, and through the discriminating intelligence, you are trying to avoid that error. Why? So as to be able to gather new experiences. Okay, so that is where the memory is playing a role. And he gives an example. He says, in the headstand, for example, so in Shirshasana, something that usually goes wrong is that the upper arm shortens. Okay, now again you are seeing how he has related something which is very sort of cerebral and something very lofty to something very particular, and therefore making that particular itself lofty. So in the way he thinks, the very mundane physical things come with a lofty philosophical background everywhere, and that is why that there is the depth and the richness which otherwise would be missing. Okay. So in Shirshasana, the upper arm shortens. So memory warns us, be aware before it happens. Discriminating experiment awakens consciousness. So with the memory as a storehouse giving the foresight, now the experiment is commencing, and that is a discriminating experience where now observations are being made. So he used to say, right, to bring the intelligence to the arm, to bring the intelligence to the toe, and so on. And now of course we understood the words as they mean, but with the background of this whole philosophy that we probably didn't know earlier, now with that background, we begin to understand the depth of the meaning when such things are being said in classes. So the discriminating experiment awakens consciousness, awareness with discrimination and memory. And we saw this mix of discrimination and memory and the separation of that in the sutra where we talked about smriti. The same thing is being brought here. So awareness with discrimination and memory brings down bad habits, which are repeated action based on wrong perception. So the role of knowledge and discrimination in refining action, which applies to the life as a whole, but the asanas and the classes are a place where this can be understood sort of very minutely, right? And the real understanding happens because otherwise there are too many variables in life and very difficult to understand. But once confined to a specific asana and so on, you sort of understand this in a much more minute and organic way, where all the sort of the sheaths of the body are able to realize that. So which are repeated action based on wrong perception and replaces them with their opposite. So in this process, the brain must be creative, not mechanical. Okay, and therefore he is cautioning against habits coming from memory. The mechanical brain questions only the external phenomena, bringing objective knowledge. The creative brain calls into question the inner and outer, bringing subjective and spiritual knowledge. Okay, so now, just like the memory and the intelligence, the discrimination is understood. Even within the brain, the mechanical and the creative, the looking inward and the looking outward, that is being understood in the context of specific asanas, which makes it a very sort of a controlled laboratory to understand these concepts, which is difficult to understand in the normal life where there are so many circumstances which obscure that vision and understanding. So now, further he says, in asana, understanding begins with the inner skin, right? And this is something he has repeated so many times in so many classes. So if you remember, so in Shirshasana, he used to say, separate the brain from the skull, right? Or he used to say, okay, the skin should be soft, bring a gap between the skin and the flesh in several asanas. So he is giving a clue here where he says, in asana, understanding begins with the inner skin, which also says that merely reading this philosophy, merely thinking that sitting and meditating, just being in the sphere of the mind is not sufficient, because there is this whole embodiment is an organic whole where the rajas and tamas in other systems are going to obstruct something which is being purely done in the realm of the mind. And therefore the asana, starting from the outside, he says understanding begins with the inner skin, and that has to be done. So that cannot be skipped and directly somebody sits and thinks how it's going to be in an asana and just thinks about all these precepts. The actual putting it into action in an asana is essential, which is also part of the whole traditional method of yoga. And in pranayama, with the inner membrane of the nose. So these are starting points of the spiritual quest in asana and pranayama. So what might sound like mundane instructions, which sort of has to be repeated in every class, it sort of become a norm. that actually comes from this whole background of the philosophy behind it. And that is where it has to be placed, and that is how it has to be understood. Then he says, in this way, so that was the beginning, right? It begins with the inner side of the skin and the inner membrane of the nose. And in this way, a virtuous character is built up. So that is where the parishuddhi is coming in. Smruti parishuddhi, the purification. So in this way, a virtuous character is built up. When awareness is linked to intelligence, honesty comes into being. When brain and body move in harmony, there is integrity. So the oneness is important, because the lack of this oneness is fluctuation, which is the rajas and tamas, which is the mala, rajolesha malopetam, which we saw earlier. So that unless that mala goes away, there is no nirmalatvam, there is no parishuddhi, and all the things that we saw in chitta parikarma. So all of them has to begin in this place and lead in this direction. So honesty comes into being. When brain and body move in harmony, there is integrity. In this long process of tapas, memory supports the building up progress and the building up process. So now here the role of memory and the smriti parishuddhi is being sort of concretized. So when memory functions perfectly, it becomes one with the intelligence. Even in the Gita, the Lord has said, Matta smritir jnanam apohanam cha. So the smriti, the memory, the knowledge, and the fading away of the memory, the removal of memory is also coming from me. So here he says, when memory functions perfectly, it becomes one with the intelligence. At this point, memory, which had originally dug for us so many pits, has transformed itself into our true Guru. Right? So this is a sort of a beautiful illustration where something that started at a very sort of detached, lofty cerebral plane has been directly linked to our practice and how it is to be understood in our daily sort of asana practice that Guruji has sort of very nicely delineated in the context of this particular sutra.
See what Guruji is trying to say here. We are dealing with samapatti. Now what is samapatti? If you have heard, if you recall, param pratyaksham, it's a knowledge structure. And samapatti or samadhi is the highest realm of knowledge, ultimate and final realm of knowledge. Where the knowledge culminates, reaches the finality, it is called samadhi. And the process of samadhi is called samapatti. So samapatti is that which gives you finality of knowledge, acme plane of knowledge, last culminating final, absolutely final phase of knowledge. So that's knowledge structure. Now how is this knowledge structure? When you did first time your Tadasana or Shirshasana, what was your notion? What notion did you develop? When you first time ever stood on your head, or first time ever you did your Tadasana. Now what is the notion today? It has been evolving. The older notions have been replaced by newer notions. That's how we evolve. That's how our knowledge process is. So, Smruti Parishuddhi. Now, Smruti Parishuddhi, see, you will usually understand, distinguish between knowledge and memory. You have clear-cut understanding. You say, this is knowledge, that's memory. Now, when you say Shirshasana is good, is it your knowledge or is it your memory? You have been doing Shirshasana for 10 years, 20 years, and you say this is very good. Is it your knowledge or is it your memory? So we mess up between knowledge and memory many times. You all understand English and you claim you know English. It is not knowledge of English that you have. It's not that you know English. The fact of the matter is, you remember the meanings of the words in English. Suppose I remove memory card from you totally and I go on speaking. If you know English, you should understand. If you know English, you should understand. But it's all memory. You know the meanings of the words. I am uttering words. You know the meanings of the word is your claim. Fact of the matter is you remember the meanings of the words. if you did not remember the meanings of these words, you would have had no comprehension. So many times we refer to memory as knowledge. More often it is memory. When you say, I know this, how much is the memory in it and how much is your realization in it? And that's why the word Smriti Parishuddhi, the memory, is used here. Memory, again, it is an impression. What is memory? Memory is impression. So your impression of Tadasana, what was the impression of Tadasana first time you did? And what is the impression that you are getting today if you do Tadasana again? Huge difference. And understand this, in the spiritual Adhyatmic realm, it's a totally different process than worldly plane. Now we all had our education, we became graduates and postgraduates or whatever has happened in our case. It started where? It started with literal letters. If it is case of English, A for apple, B for bat, C for cat, D for dog. So we learned the alphabets, we learned the literal letters, then we learned the words, then we learned the sentences, then we learned passages. Now in our educational system, all those do not get disproved as wrong. A for apple, B for bat, C for cat is not wrong. And the structure is laid on that. So from A for apple, B for bat, perhaps today you have PhD in Shakespeare, PhD in Wordsworth, PhD in Milton, PhD in Bertrand Russell. Earlier knowledge is not disproved, is not invalidated. We don't discard. We have not discarded primary education when we got into secondary education, discard secondary education when it came to high school education, discard high school education when we went to pre-graduation and graduation. We did not go on discarding. This building has come up, we have not discarded the foundation, we can't discard the foundation. It is on that foundation that the building is standing. So this is how in the material world is. So what is taught to you in primary school is you are not told it was all wrong, now come to middle school. Is that right? And when you went from middle school to high school, you are not told middle school was all wrong and now we are teaching you high school. But in spiritual realm, earlier knowledge gets invalidated and disproved also. That is why Guruji used to say, that was taught yesterday, I am teaching you something today. He said, forget yesterday and do this. Like your notion of the first Tadasana is almost forgotten. It has no role to play now today, is that right? Your first notion, first time notion of Shirshasana, perhaps it has got invalidated actually. Why you did Shirshasana, why Shirshasana should be done, how Shirshasana should be done, it's all invalidated today. It is all disproved today. That's how we are evolving. We have to discard the earlier stages and then go to higher stages. Unlike in the worldly realm, you don't have to discard, you can't discard. A for apple is not wrong, B for bat is not wrong. But today you have 2-3 PhDs in English. But in subjective realm, you need a courage that all this time I had ignorance or I had improper knowledge. It has to be discarded and then you can have evolvement. You can evolve not by such structuring like a civil structure. Foundation is still there. It has to be there as long as the building is standing. It will perhaps still be there when the building is collapsed. Is that right? But you can't remove the foundation. Now the building is ready, let me remove the foundation. What will happen? So this Smriti Parishuddhi, concept Parishuddhi, notion Parishuddhi, discarding notions, facing the invalidation of your knowledge is so important. That requires courage. And that's how the knowledge process is raised up. Unlike any other structure in the worldly realm. So Guruji used to often get wild. That I taught you last time, yesterday. Do this way. He was asking you to discard it, and you had to take recourse to it, because unless you put your foot on it, you could not go to next step. See, suppose you are climbing stairs here, and as you climb up, I go on removing the steps. You will be stuck there. You will not be able to come down. Is that right? So the steps have to be there. Similarly, most of knowledge in the spiritual Adhyatmic realm is to face disillusionment more than gain knowledge. कालचं ज्ञान आज विपर्यय आहे. Yesterday's knowledge is invalidated today. You must be able to put up with it. Otherwise you will not evolve. So there has to be purification in the knowledge process, which is actually memory process. You had notion on the first Tadasana, every day you had a notion, and all those are been discarded if you do Shirshasana today. Notion should be discarded, but there are certain memories which you can't discard. Like in Shirshasana, you must interlock the fingers, place the forearm. Now, that's not a notion, that's an action. You can't forget the actions, but you have to forget the notions. You have to discard the notions. So somewhere try to understand what is the process of evolvement in spiritual realm, Adhyatmic realm, which is different than in the mundane and worldly realm. But there are so many dogmatic, fundamentalist Iyengar teachers. They say, Guruji taught like this. But then he said, next time, that is invalid. You did not hear it. Suppose I attend his one class, and that is my last class. I don't attend again. I become concretized. This is the way he taught. And I go on becoming a promoter of that. This is the way he taught. But every time he was telling us, today I am teaching you a new thing. So those who, suppose I stopped at that lesson, I would not be knowing how he went further. I would be stuck to that, and I would believe that this is Iyengar Yoga. There are many who are fighting that way. What they learnt, they consider Iyengar Yoga. Not what he taught. Nobody knows what he taught, because everyone learned differently. Now we are teaching Yoga Sutras. Each one has different perception and cognition. Is that right? We are saying one and the same thing. But suppose there is Srinith here, his cognition of what I say will be different than someone in you. So even the knowledge process is different. How you know. I am saying that we are saying the same thing. Everybody's perception is not identical and same and ditto the same. Why? Because you have your own baggages. Your baggage of perception, cognition, memories, etc. Everyone is coming with different raw material. And therefore everyone is turning out different knowledge out of the same material that we are giving. So, if we have to arrive at what is Iyengar Yoga, we should not go by what each one perceived, what Guruji wanted to say. It can come in horse's mouth as to what is Iyengar Yoga. There is no point in his students fighting, this is Iyengar Yoga, what I teach is Iyengar Yoga, what you teach is not Iyengar Yoga. Nobody knows what he taught. It is only he knew what he taught. But see the problems that can come up. So our notion also have to improve. When we became better student of Iyengar Yoga or Yoga, you understood Iyengar Yoga differently. Many of them did not all pursue at all for yoga, but they wanted to understand anger yoga. He was teaching yoga, why don't you understand yoga? But they became fundamentalists. This is anger yoga. This is what I learned. Even they claim this is what he taught. But who knows what he taught? How can you say this is what he taught? It is your perception that he taught this. So we should be only asking him what really he taught. He taught us. So this is how the structure is. So Smriti Parishuddhi is so important. So by the time acme of the knowledge is reached, there are so many things which are discarded, invalidated. That's the process of Smriti Parishuddhi. Now if Iyengar Yoga had been worldly subject, there was no point for him to tell us, that was taught yesterday and now forget it. Now if I go on telling you every time, forget what I taught so far and now learn, you will be confused. It will be confounding. But that's how the knowledge realm is. It is a disillusion process. All knowledge process after a realm is disillusionment. What's the difference between two statements? Now we are talking. You say, yes, I have understood. I have understood. I am understanding. I have understood. At some point in time, you say, I now understand. I now understand. What does it mean? What I so far understood was invalidated. Which is better knowledge? You all want to understand right now as we speak. You don't want anything that is incomprehensible. You want to understand. Is that right? You don't want to have condition that you don't understand. What is the caliber of the knowledge? Suppose you understand. Every word that we say you understand, you understand, you understand. What is the caliber of it? Particularly when a time comes up and you say, now I understand. So now I understand is superior knowledge. Then I understand. Therefore, many times in class I say, I don't want you to understand what I say every time. I want you to have a condition at some point in time that I now understand. There is a ripeness in it. There is ripeness in such a declaration that I now understand. Then I understand. Solid state. So that knowledge is more important, which is not solid state. This is more ripe. How will it take place? By refining the notions you have. Smriti Parishuddhi, refining the notions, refining the impressions, refining the memories, refining the perceptions. The refinement should be there, rather than becoming dogmatic. This is what it is. So that's why Smriti Parishuddhi is the first factor in the sutra for describing Nirvitarka Samapatti, the finality of knowledge, beyond which there is no knowledge. Nobody can scale greater knowledge than the Nirvitarka plane. If I get Nirvitarka plane knowledge, you get, our knowledge will be equated. There won't be any more or less or inferior, superior. That's the finality realm of knowledge that is being now described in the sutra. First factor is Smriti Parishuddho, the refinement of the concepts, refinement of the notions, refinement of the ideas, refinement of the memories, refinement of the cognition, refinement of the perception. For all that, there is one term, Smriti Parishuddhi. Parishuddhi means purification. So for Nirvitarka Samapatti, which is finality of knowledge, it reaches the acme point, purificatory process. Then comes Arthamatra Nirbhasa, other aspects of such knowledge. Swarupa Shunyeva, another aspect of knowledge, which will be discussed later. We have not got to those terms of the sutra. However, the sutra is Smriti Parishuddho, Arthamatra Nirbhasa, Swarupa Shunyeva Nirvitarkaha. So those are the other factors which describe finality of knowledge. The first factor is Smriti Parishuddha, Smriti Parishuddhi, which is by refining notion, concept, ideas, memories, knowledge, perception, etc., etc. Okay?
So next time we'll go to the next sutra, 1.44. So we have finished Savitarka and Nirvitarka. So starting next time, we'll go into Savichara and Nirvichara, which is about the subtle elements, subtle objects. Okay, so we'll say the shlokas on Guruji, and maybe take a question or two. Vaijnānika shikshakatve
वैज्ञानिक शिक्षकत्वे
कलाकार आसनेषु यः
कलाकार आसनेषु यः
योगाभ्यासे च तत्त्वज्ञस्
योगाभ्यासे च तत्त्वज्ञस्
तं वन्दे सुन्दरं गुरुं
तं वन्दे सुन्दरं गुरुं
योगवृक्षो लोकेऽस्मिन्
योगवृक्षो लोकेऽस्मिन्
वर्धितो यस्य प्रेरणया
वर्धितो यस्य प्रेरणया
योगाचार्याय गुरवे
योगाचार्याय गुरवे
सुन्दराय नमो नमः.
सुन्दराय नमो नमः.
So those who want to leave can leave. We'll take one question maybe.
One of the sessions you had said when we are doing the asanas, you said doing and done. Then you also said that when it comes to breath, it has to be knowing and known. So when we are doing the asanas, you should know your breath and all that stuff. Last class you said that when it comes to the mind, it is reading and read. Today it was like, can you realize the skin and the body, which is different? So for the asanas and for the breath in the asanas, I am working on yet. And you also had said in one of the sessions that I know is not knowing, or it's not knowable. So when you say I know, you stop the thinking that, means you don't think further. It's like I know and you just stop. So now when it comes to the skin, and which is not, means you have to separate the skin from the body. How do you work on that? I just wanted to know.
So it's only aspect of finer sensitivity. Sensitivity is basically sensitivity. Now, if your sensitivity is gross, then you don't have distinctions. If your sensitivity is more fine, you can make distinctions between the things. So, sensitivity is one of the basic component in pursuit of yoga. You must have sensitivity. You can't be just action worthy, activity worthy. You must have sensitivities. And then if you have finer sensitivity, then you will know that here the skin ends and here the flesh begins. Or this is flesh and this is skin within your embodiment. So in your technical proficiency of asana, you will be able to move the skin, not the flesh, move the flesh, not the skin. So that's the proficiency aspect. Otherwise we make a gross movement. If you are asked to move, you will move whole limb and a part of the body. But if you are in a position, you should not be moving a part of the body or any part of the body. But then you have to make skin movement, muscle movement, flesh movement, etc. So that is, when you have finer sensitivity, you will be able to do that. So when the fruit is raw, you can't separate the skin easily. It will draw the part of the substance of the fruit also with the skin. But suppose the fruit is very ripe, you can just peel the skin. Raw orange and ripe orange. Suppose the orange is raw. Will you be able to peel the skin, merely the skin? No, it will draw some part of substance of the orange fruit as well. But orange is very, very ripe. You can exclusively peel the skin. So when you are raw in your activities, raw in your sensitivities, raw in your executions, it is like you are trying to peel the skin of a raw orange. It will peel so many things apart from skin. But if you are ripe, you will only peel the skin. So when you are ripe in your activity, ripe in your sensitivities, then you can do that.
आत्मा अवयवी आहे का?
See, avayava and avayavi, it is with realm of the matter. Something is part and something the whole. So with reference to Atma, the word is not avayava avayavi, it is anga angi. Our body is made up of parts, physical parts, mental parts, psychic parts. So our body, our embodiment is made up of parts. So that's why this is an embodiment. And with reference to Atma, it is said to be embodied. Embodied. So anga angi words will be fitting to the Atma and the body and mind, but not in English. The English you have to say body and embodied. So Atma is not really avayavi. It is an entity, separate entity from the Anga. Anga has parts. Angi is one who is indwelling. Purusha, Purishete iti Purushaha, we have seen etymological meaning. So we have to distinguish between the part and whole, the body and embodied. So he is not part of the body. Atma is not a part of the body. As much as atom is a part of the mat. Because it's in the material realm. Mat is also material realm, atoms are also in material realm. So there are causes, subtler material of the mat. Then that material has subtler material. That material, subtle material. Like suppose it's a rubber mat. You say rubber is a material. From where do you get rubber? Rubber you get from a plant. Is that right? Then from where do you get the plant? You get the plant from seed. So you can be going to these cause and effects in the material realm in one way. So Atma is not it's Angi. In the sense it is embodied, it's not part of the whole. Our Atma is not the part of the whole. It is separate entity which is within us. So embodied, embodiment. Body and embodied. So in English, these are the words that you can coin. Because your legs and arms are not parts of Atma. Atma doesn't have parts. There are no legs to Atma. If you look into the description of Atma which comes in Upanishads, no legs, no arms, no eyes, no ears, no organ to Atma. However, all the organs and senses have the Atma as a substrate. It is the locus on which all these things can stand. They will not otherwise stand. If the Atma is there, they won't be standing at all. However, it is not the source, it is not the cause. Atma is not the cause of your body and mind. If you look at the cause and effect relationship or the material investigation, you will not come to, like you say, the rose is a seed. You can't come to like that between the body, mind and Atma. That Atma is the cause. And over the Atma you have this body and mind complex. It is only a presiding deity. It's a substrate. It's a locus. It is because it is there. This is all there. So it is not cause and effect. When we say because there is seed, there is a flower, because it is cause and effect. When we say because there is seed, there can be a flower, it is cause and effect. But because there is Atma, this body and mind is there, no. It is not cause and effect relationship. It's a substrate. Like energy, electricity. Because of electricity, our fans running and light is running. Now that is, electricity is no part of fan, no part of light. Because otherwise it will be there in all electrical apparatus. However, it is not part of every electrical apparatus. It is because of light, the light is there. Because of electricity, there is light. Because of electricity, there is fan. Electricity is not part of the fan. Electricity is not part of light. Is that right? Similarly, Atma is not part of this embodiment. It's a separate, individual, independent entity. That's why it is called Purusha Prakriti. This classification comes in metaphysics.
In simple words, can we say Chitta is avayavi?
Huh?
In simple words,
Chitta is
avayavi?
Chitta is avayavi, and Chitta is also avayava of the Prakriti matter. The 24 principles of Prakriti. Some of the matters, the Buddhi, Ahankar, Chitta is turned out of it. So it has a part. Chitta is part of something. Chitta has its part. Because it is in the material realm. Chitta is in material realm. Chit is not coming in the picture there. Because Chitta is Prakriti, and all that is over it is also Prakriti. Man, Buddhi, Ahankar, Indriya, Sharir, everything is evolving out of it. Because that's material realm. So Chitta is both avayava of something, avayavi of something.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you. Yeah.